I stood outside the Skyline Sovereign Club on Christmas Eve, watching my breath turn to frost in the bitter New York air. 7 years. 7 years since I had set foot in a room with my family. 7 years since my father told me I would amount to nothing. And now here I was wearing a simple black dress I could have purchased at any department store, carrying a handbag that cost less than the appetizers they were serving inside. I had dressed this way on purpose. I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to know if anything had changed or if they would still look at me the way they always had, like I was a disappointment wrapped in skin. The doorman nodded as I approached. He did not recognize my name when I gave it. Why would he to the world Grace Holloway was nobody? A ghost who had vanished from the gilded halls of Manhattan society and never returned. But I knew something they did not. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped into a lobby dripping with crystal chandeliers and the scent of old money. A string quartet played somewhere in the distance. Waiters in crisp white jackets carried silver trays of champagne. This was my father's world, the world of Wall Street titans and banking dynasties, where a person's worth was measured in portfolios and pedigrees. I had once belonged here, or at least I had tried to. The maitre d' led me through a maze of private dining rooms until we reached the one reserved for the Holloway family Christmas dinner. I paused at the entrance, steadying myself. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see the shapes of people moving and hear the low rumble of my father's voice, commanding the room as he always did. Charles Holloway, CEO of Holloway Securities, a man who had built an empire on other people's money and his own unshakable belief that he was never, ever wrong. I opened the door. The conversation stopped. Every head turned. My mother Eleanor sat frozen with a wine glass halfway to her lips. My brother Daniel stood near the window, his face cycling through surprise, guilt, and something that might have been relief. His wife Meredith pressed her hand against her chest, like a woman watching a car accident in slow motion. And there, at the head of the table, sat my father. He looked older than I remembered. The silver in his hair had spread, and new lines carved deep grooves around his mouth. But his eyes were the same cold, calculating, measuring everything and everyone against some invisible standard that only he understood. "Grace," he said my name like it was a stock that had underperformed. "You actually came. You invited me." "I did. I thought perhaps time had taught you something." He gestured to an empty chair at the far end of the table, as far from him as physically possible. "Sit. We were just discussing the new partnership with Reed Capital." I took my seat without a word. A waiter appeared at my elbow offering champagne. I accepted it, though I did not drink. I needed my mind sharp tonight. The conversation resumed, though it flowed around me rather than including me. My father spoke at length about his plans for expansion, his brilliant strategies, his inevitable success. The other guests, business associates, family friends, people who had known me since childhood, nodded along like puppets on strings. Not one of them asked where I had been. Not one of them asked what I had been doing for 7 years. I might as well have been furniture. 30 minutes into the meal, my father set down his knife and fork with deliberate precision. He dabbed his napkin against his lips and turned his gaze toward me. "So, Grace, I have to ask." His voice carried across the table, silencing every other conversation. "Are you still working at that diner? Or have you finally found a real job?" The question was designed to humiliate. He knew exactly what buttons to push. "I am doing fine, Father. Fine." He repeated the word with a slight smile. "Fine is what mediocre people say when they have nothing to show for themselves." He glanced around the table, making sure everyone was watching. "Do you know what I was worth at your age, Grace? I had already made my first $1 million. I was sitting on the board of 3 companies. I was building something." "I remember." "And what have you built?" He leaned back in his chair, spreading his hands. "What do you have to show for 31 years of life, a studio apartment somewhere, a used car with 200,000 miles on it?" I felt the familiar heat rising in my chest, the old anger, the old shame. For a moment, I was 24 again, standing in his study, while he told me I was a waste of potential, a failure, a daughter he wished he had never had. But I was not 24 anymore. "I have enough," I said quietly. My father laughed. It was not a kind sound. "Enough. Listen to her, everyone. She has enough." He shook his head. "Do you know what the difference is between people who have enough and people who have everything? Ambition, drive, the willingness to do what it takes." "Charles," my mother's voice was barely above a whisper, "perhaps this is not the time." "No, Eleanor, this is exactly the time." He fixed me with that cold stare. "I invited you here tonight because I wanted to give you one more chance, one more opportunity to admit that I was right all along. You should have joined the company. You should have learned the family business. Instead, you threw it all away for some ridiculous dream about technology and computers." He picked up his wineglass and swirled the contents. "So tell me, Grace, when you look at your empty wallet and your empty life, do you finally understand what you gave up?" The table was silent. Every eye was on me. I could feel the weight of their judgment, their pity, their quiet satisfaction at watching Charles Holloway put his wayward daughter in her place. I set down my napkin and met my father's gaze. "I understand a great many things, Father." He waited, expecting me to crumble, expecting me to apologize, to beg for his approval, to admit that he had been right and I had been foolish. Instead, I smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but something in it made him pause. For just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, the expression of a man who had just realized that the chess game he thought he was winning might not be going according to plan. He did not know. None of them did. They did not know about the fund I had built from nothing. They did not know about the algorithms I had created, the investments I had made, the quiet empire I had assembled, while they were busy pretending I did not exist. They did not know that the banking partner my father was so desperate to impress Jonathan Reed himself was sitting in this very room aware of exactly who I was. They did not know that I was the founder of GH Venture. They did not know that I was worth more than everyone at this table combined, but they would. Before this night was over, they would know everything. And my father, the man who had told me I would never amount to anything, who had cast me out and called me worthless, who had mocked my empty wallet in front of his wealthy friends, would finally understand what true karma looked like. I lifted my champagne glass and took a single deliberate sip. The betrayal had begun 7 years ago. Tonight it will end. I grew up in a house that looked like a museum and felt like a courtroom. The Holloway estate sat on 12 acres of manicured lawn in Greenwich, Connecticut. A Georgian mansion with 23 rooms, a staff of 9, and enough antique furniture to fill a small auction house. From the outside, it was the American dream made tangible. 4 white columns framed the entrance. A circular driveway of polished stone curved past a fountain that ran year-round, even in winter, when the heating bill alone could have fed a family for months. My father had purchased the property the year I was born, 1993, as a monument to his own success. He was 31, then the same age I am now. Already he controlled one of the fastest-growing securities firms on Wall Street. Already he had made his first $10 million. The house was supposed to be a symbol of what hard work and ambition could achieve. Instead, it became a prison. My earliest memories are of silence. Not the peaceful kind that settles over a home at night, but the tense, watchful quiet of people afraid to make mistakes. My mother moved through the rooms like a ghost, arranging flowers, overseeing the staff, making sure everything was perfect for when my father came home. She never raised her voice. She never complained. She simply existed in the margins of his life, grateful for whatever attention he chose to give her. Daniel was different. My brother was born 3 years before me, and from the moment he took his first breath, my father claimed him. Daniel would inherit the company. Daniel would carry on the family name. Daniel would become everything Charles Holloway had always dreamed of being. And me, I was an afterthought, a spare. The daughter my father had not planned for and never quite knew what to do with. The favoritism was so constant that I stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the sound of traffic when you live near a highway. Daniel received a car for his 16th birthday, a brand new BMW with a ribbon wrapped around the hood. When I turned 16, my father forgot entirely. My mother gave me a card with $200 inside and apologized with her eyes. Daniel spent summers interning at Holloway Securities, learning the business from the ground up. My father took him to client dinners, introduced him to senators and CEOs, groomed him for greatness. Meanwhile, I was expected to stay home, stay quiet, and stay out of the way. Christmas was the worst. Every year, my father hosted an elaborate holiday gathering for his business associates and their families. The house would fill with powerful men in expensive suits, their wives dripping with diamonds, their children already practicing the art of looking important. A professional decorator transformed the mansion into a winter wonderland. Caterers prepared a feast that could have fed 100 people. Musicians played carols in the grand foyer while guests sipped champagne and congratulated themselves on their success. I was never allowed to attend. Year after year, I watched from the upstairs hallway as the guests arrived. I pressed my face against the banister, catching glimpses of the glittering world below. My mother would send me to bed early, promising that next year would be different. Next year, I will be old enough. Next year, my father will change his mind. He never did. The message was clear, even if no one ever said it aloud. Daniel belonged to that world of wealth and power and endless possibility. I did not. My father looked at his son and saw a reflection of himself. When he looked at me, he saw nothing worth cultivating. School offered no escape. I attended the same elite private academy as Daniel walked, the same polished hallways, sat in the same wood-paneled classrooms. But where teachers praised my brother's natural leadership and financial acumen, they seemed puzzled by my interests. I loved mathematics, but not the kind that involved balance sheets and profit margins. I was fascinated by patterns, by systems, by the hidden logic that governed everything from weather to stock markets to human behavior. My father called it a waste of time. One night when I was 15, I made the mistake of showing him a computer program I had written. It was a simple algorithm, nothing sophisticated, but I was proud of it. The program could predict with reasonable accuracy which stocks would rise or fall based on historical patterns and market sentiment. I thought he would be impressed. After all, his entire career revolved around understanding markets and making smart investments. Maybe finally he would see that I had something to offer. Instead, he barely glanced at the screen before pushing it away. "Machines cannot replace instinct," he said. "Any fool can write a program. Building real wealth requires relationships, reputation, the ability to read a room and close a deal. That is something you will never understand." The dismissal cut deeper than any insult. It was not just that he disagreed with my approach. It was that he refused to even consider the possibility that I might be right. In his mind, the verdict was already final. Daniel was the heir. Grace was the disappointment. No amount of evidence would ever change that equation. My mother tried in her limited way to bridge the gap. She praised my report cards, attended my school plays, told me that I was special even when the world disagreed. But she never confronted my father. She never demanded that he treat me fairly. Her love was genuine but powerless, a candle flame trying to warm a frozen lake. Sometimes I wonder if she was afraid. My father controlled everything: the money, the house, the social connections that defined her entire existence. Challenging him meant risking all of it. So she chose peace over justice, comfort over courage. And I learned to stop expecting her to save me. The years blurred together, birthdays forgotten, achievements ignored. Holidays spent alone in my room while the rest of the family celebrated downstairs. By the time I graduated high school, I had already built walls around my heart thick enough to withstand a siege. Daniel tried to be kind in his way. He would bring me leftovers from the Christmas parties, sneak me presents when our father was not looking, and promise that things would get better once we were both adults. But even his kindness carried the taint of pity. He was the prince, and I was the servant. No amount of stolen desserts could change that fundamental truth. When I left for college, I chose a school as far from Greenwich as I could manage, a small university in California, where nobody knew the Holloway name and nobody cared about my father's money. For the first time in my life, I could breathe. But the wounds remained. Late at night, alone in my dorm room, I would replay the memories like a film I could not stop watching. My father's dismissive voice, my mother's helpless silence, The Christmas parties where I was never welcome, the birthday dinners, where my chair sat empty, the thousand small cruelties that had shaped me into someone who trusted no one and expected nothing. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself that I would build my own life, earn my own success, prove them all wrong. What I did not tell myself, what I could not admit not yet, was that somewhere deep inside a part of me was already planning something else. Something that looked a lot like revenge. The fight that ended everything happened on a Tuesday in March, 3 weeks before my 24th birthday. I had finished graduate school 6 months earlier, a master's degree in computational mathematics from Stanford, earned with honors, and a thesis that my advisor called groundbreaking. For the first time in my life, I had something concrete to show for myself. Something even my father could not dismiss. Or so I thought. I flew back to Greenwich for what my mother called a family discussion about my future. She made it sound casual, almost warm. "Perhaps your father wants to finally welcome you into the business," she suggested over the phone. "Perhaps he has realized that times are changing and your skills could be valuable." I wanted to believe her. Despite everything, despite all the years of exclusion and disappointment, some small part of me still craved my father's approval. That hunger had never fully died. It lived in my chest like an ember that refused to go cold no matter how many times I tried to smother it. The mansion looked exactly as I remembered. Same white columns, same circular driveway, same fountain running despite the late winter chill. A housekeeper I did not recognize took my coat and directed me to my father's study on the second floor. He was waiting behind his desk, a massive oak piece that had once belonged to some railroad baron. Daniel sat in one of the leather chairs facing him. My mother perched on a settee near the window, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. Nobody stood to greet me. My father gestured to the empty chair beside Daniel. I sat feeling suddenly like a defendant awaiting sentencing. The room smelled of cigar smoke and old books. On the wall behind my father hung a portrait of his grandfather, the man who had started the family's first brokerage firm back in 1952. 4 generations of Holloways had built their fortunes in finance. According to my father, I was about to become the 5th. "I have a proposal," he began, skipping any pretense of small talk. "Holloway Securities is expanding into algorithmic trading. We need someone with technical expertise to oversee the transition. Daniel suggested that you might be suited for the role." I glanced at my brother. He gave me a small nod, encouragement mixed with warning. "The position would report directly to Daniel," my father continued. "You would handle the technical implementation while he manages strategy and client relationships. It is an entry-level role, but with room for advancement if you prove yourself capable." Entry-level, after a master's degree from Stanford, reporting to my brother who had barely scraped through his undergraduate business program. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. What kind of authority would I have over the algorithms themselves? Would I be able to design the trading strategies or just implement decisions made by others? My father's expression flickered with annoyance. "You would implement. Strategy is Daniel's domain. You would provide technical support." "Technical support?" I repeated the phrase slowly, letting its full meaning settle. "You want me to be a programmer, an employee following orders. I want you to learn the business from the ground up the way Daniel did, the way I did. Nobody starts at the top." "Daniel started as a junior analyst with his own office and a direct line to you. That is not the ground up." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. My mother shifted on the settee, a nervous rustling of silk. Daniel studied the carpet like it contained hidden secrets. My father leaned forward, his eyes hardening. "Your brother earned his position through dedication and loyalty. He understood that family comes first. He did not run off to California chasing foolish dreams about computers. My foolish dreams earned me a degree from one of the best programs in the country. My thesis on predictive market modeling was published in 3 academic journals. I have had job offers from Google, from Goldman Sachs, from hedge funds that would pay me twice whatever you are offering." "Then take them." His voice was ice. "Go work for strangers. See how far your precious algorithms carry you when you do not have the Holloway name opening doors." Something snapped inside me. All the years of silence, all the swallowed anger, all the desperate hope that someday he would see me as more than a disappointment. It collapsed under the weight of that single dismissive sentence. I stood up. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound like a scream. The Holloway name has never opened a single door for me. You made sure of that. Every Christmas party where I was locked in my room while Daniel shook hands with senators. Every birthday you forgot because you were too busy grooming your golden son. Every time you looked at me like I was a stranger who had wandered into your house by accident. My voice was shaking now, but I could not stop. You never wanted a daughter. You wanted another son, and when you got me instead, you decided I was worthless. My mother made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Daniel reached for my arm, trying to calm me, but I pulled away. My father rose from his chair. At 62, he was still an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with the commanding presence of a man accustomed to absolute control. But I was done being intimidated. "You are emotional," he said, his tone dripping with contempt. "Hysterical. This is exactly why women do not belong in finance. They cannot separate feelings from business." This was never about business. This was about you needing someone to look down on so you could feel powerful. The words hung in the air between us. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then my father walked to the door and opened it wide. "Get out." "Charles," my mother's voice cracked. "Please, she is your daughter." "She is no daughter of mine. Not anymore." He did not look at me as he spoke, his gaze fixed on some point in the hallway, as if I had already ceased to exist. "I gave you chance after chance to prove yourself, to show that you could be part of this family, and every time you threw it back in my face. So go, build your empire of computers and algorithms. See how far it gets you without money, without connections, without anyone who gives a damn whether you succeed or fail." I walked past him without a word. Down the grand staircase, through the grand foyer, out the front door into the cold March afternoon. I did not look back. I did not say goodbye to my mother or my brother. I simply walked until I reached the end of the driveway, then kept walking until a taxi finally stopped to pick me up. That night, I checked into a cheap motel near LaGuardia Airport. The room smelled of cigarettes and despair. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my coat, and stared at the water-stained ceiling for hours. Daniel called at midnight. His voice was thick with guilt and helpless apology. "I will keep in touch," he promised. "Whatever he says, you are still my sister. That will never change." I wanted to believe him. Part of me did. But I also knew our father. I knew how he operated, how he demanded absolute loyalty, how he punished anyone who defied him. Daniel had a wife, a career, a future built entirely on Charles Holloway's approval. Our relationship would not survive that pressure. Nothing ever did. I was 24 years old, alone in a motel room, with a suitcase full of clothes and a bank account that held less than $3,000. Tomorrow, I will start over from nothing. And someday, I did not know when I did not know how I would make my father regret every single word. I spent my first month of freedom sleeping on a couch in Brooklyn that belonged to a college friend who owed me a favor. Her apartment was a fourth-floor walk-up in Bushwick, the kind of place where the radiator clanged all night and the neighbors fought in 3 different languages. I paid her $200 a week for the privilege of that lumpy couch and access to a bathroom I had to share with her and 2 other roommates. It was a far cry from the Greenwich Mansion, but at least nobody here looked at me like I was a failure. Finding work proved harder than I expected. Despite my Stanford degree and impressive references, the job market had other ideas. Goldman Sachs had filled their position. Google wanted someone with more industry experience. The hedge funds that had courted me 6 months earlier suddenly had hiring freezes or budget constraints or vague concerns about cultural fit. I began to suspect my father's hand in these rejections. Charles Holloway knew everyone on Wall Street. A single phone call, a whispered warning about his difficult daughter, that would be enough to poison the well. So I lowered my expectations. Then I lowered them again. By April, I was working the breakfast shift at a diner in Midtown, pouring coffee for investment bankers who probably managed more money before 9 in the morning than I would see in a lifetime. The irony was not lost on me. Neither was the humiliation of wearing a stained apron and sensible shoes, while men in tailored suits talked about quarterly returns and market volatility. But I listened. God, did I listen. Every conversation that drifted across those vinyl booths became data. I learned which sectors were heating up and which were cooling down. I tracked the patterns in their complaints, their boasts, their nervous speculation about interest rates and international trade. My graduate training has taught me to recognize signals in noise. Now I was gathering signals from the most expensive sources in Manhattan, and they were paying me to do it. In the evening, I cleaned rooms at a boutique hotel near Central Park. The work was exhausting but mindless, which left my brain free to process everything I had absorbed during the day. I would push my cart down carpeted hallways, changing sheets and scrubbing toilets, while mentally constructing models of market behavior that my Stanford professors would have found fascinating. One night in June, everything changed. I was finishing my shift at the hotel when I noticed a stack of papers left behind in one of the suites. Normally, I would have tossed them in the trash without a second glance. But a phrase caught my eye: predictive variance modeling. Someone had printed out a draft research paper on algorithmic trading strategies. The margins were covered with handwritten notes, criticisms, suggestions, alternative approaches. Whoever owned this document understood quantitative finance at a level that matched or exceeded my own training. I should have left it on the desk for housekeeping to return. Instead, I photographed every page with my phone. That paper led me to a name: Marcus Webb. A quick internet search revealed that he was a former quant at Deutsche Bank who had left the corporate world to advise early-stage fintech startups. His office was located in a converted warehouse in the Flatiron district, and according to his website, he was always looking for talented analysts who thought differently about markets. I emailed him the next morning. No cover letter, no resume, just a detailed critique of his research paper pointing out 3 significant flaws in his variance calculations and proposing a more elegant solution. He responded within 2 hours. Our first meeting took place at a coffee shop near his office. Marcus was in his late 40s, with the rumpled appearance of someone who spent more time with spreadsheets than mirrors. He ordered black coffee and immediately launched into a barrage of technical questions designed to test whether my email had been a fluke or a genuine display of expertise. I answered every one. By the end of that conversation, he offered me a job, not as an analyst or a programmer, but as a consultant to a small group of founders who were building something revolutionary. They needed someone who could design predictive algorithms that actually worked, not the theoretical models that academics published in journals, but practical tools that could generate real returns in real markets. The pay was terrible, barely enough to cover my rent on a tiny studio apartment in Queens that I found through a friend of a friend, but the access was priceless. Through Marcus, I met Elena Vasquez, a former derivatives trader who had walked away from a 7-figure salary to build her own quantitative fund. I met David Chen, a machine learning specialist from MIT whose neural network models were years ahead of anything the major banks were using. I met a rotating cast of founders, investors, and industry veterans who treated me like a colleague rather than an afterthought. For the first time in my life, I belonged somewhere. The work consumed me. I spent 16-hour days developing algorithms that could identify market inefficiencies invisible to human traders. My models integrated sentiment analysis, macroeconomic indicators, and real-time news feeds into a unified predictive framework. The results were extraordinary, consistent returns that outperformed traditional strategies by significant margins. Elena noticed first. She pulled me aside after a presentation and asked a question that changed everything. "Have you ever thought about starting your own fund?" The idea seemed absurd. I was 25 years old, broke, and completely unknown in the financial world. Fund managers needed capital connections and a track record of success. I had none of those things. But Elena saw something different. She saw the algorithms, the models, the raw intellectual horsepower that could not be taught or bought. She introduced me to investors who cared more about returns than pedigree. She helped me navigate the labyrinth of legal requirements and regulatory filings. She became the mentor I had never had. By the fall of my second year in New York, I was ready. I launched GH Venture with $3 million in seed capital from a small network of angel investors who believed in my work. The fund operated under a structure designed for maximum anonymity. My name appeared nowhere in the public filings. To the outside world, GH Venture was a black box that produced remarkable returns through proprietary trading strategies. Nobody knew that the founder was a 26-year-old woman who had been disowned by her family and still ate ramen noodles for dinner most nights. The secrecy was deliberate. If my father discovered what I was building, he would find a way to destroy it. Charles Holloway did not tolerate competition, especially not from someone he had declared worthless. So I became invisible. I signed documents with initials only. I communicated through lawyers and intermediaries. I built an empire in the shadows, brick by careful brick, while the man who had cast me out continued to believe that I was scrubbing toilets and pouring coffee somewhere in the city. He would learn the truth eventually. They all would, but not yet. First, I needed to become too powerful to stop. The first $100 million came faster than I ever imagined. Within 18 months of launching GH Venture, my algorithms had generated returns that made traditional hedge funds look like savings accounts. While the broader market stumbled through volatility and uncertainty, my models identified opportunities that others missed entirely. A currency fluctuation in Southeast Asia, a supply chain disruption that would affect semiconductor stocks 6 weeks before analysts noticed, the quiet accumulation of shares by institutional investors that signaled upcoming mergers. My fund did not predict the future. It simply reads the present more accurately than anyone else. Word spread through the investment community the way secrets always do, whispered conversations at private clubs, encrypted emails between portfolio managers, rumors that grew more elaborate with each retelling. Who was behind GH Venture? How were they achieving these returns? The mystery only added to the fund's allure. Wealthy clients did not need to know my name. They only needed to see the numbers. By my 28th birthday, assets under management had crossed $500 million. I moved out of my cramped Queens studio and into a modest apartment in Brooklyn Heights, though I kept the address unlisted and the furnishing simple. Wealth meant nothing to me beyond the freedom it provided. I had watched my father surround himself with luxury while treating people like disposable assets. That would never be my path. Elena remained my closest advisor and only real friend. We met weekly at a small Italian restaurant in Tribeca, where the owner knew to seat us in the back corner away from curious eyes. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, I still felt too young to order. We discussed strategy and expansion and the peculiar loneliness of building something nobody could know you had built. One evening she arrived with news that shifted everything. "Jonathan Reed wants a meeting." The name sent electricity through my spine. Jonathan Reed was the chairman of Reed Capital, one of the most prestigious investment banks on Wall Street. His firm managed assets for sovereign wealth funds, billionaire families, and Fortune 500 companies. A partnership with Reed Capital would catapult GH Venture into an entirely different stratosphere. It would also bring me dangerously close to my father's world. "How did he find us?" I asked. "Performance attracts attention." Elena shrugged. "Your returns over the past quarter were impossible to ignore. Reed's people have been asking questions for months. They finally tracked down one of our limited partners and made inquiries. What do they know about the founder? Nothing concrete. They assume GH stands for some old money family trying to stay anonymous. Probably European aristocracy or Middle Eastern royalty." She smiled. "Nobody suspects a 28-year-old woman from Connecticut." The meeting took place at Reed Capital's headquarters in Midtown, a glass tower that reflected the Manhattan skyline like a mirror. I arrived in a conservative suit I had purchased specifically for the occasion, expensive enough to signal success, understated enough to avoid drawing attention. My hair was pulled back, my makeup was minimal. I looked exactly like what I wanted to appear, a representative of the mysterious fund, not its architect. Jonathan Reed greeted me in a conference room on the 47th floor. He was older than I expected, perhaps 65, with silver hair and the weathered handsomeness of someone who had spent decades navigating the highest levels of finance. His handshake was firm, His eyes missed nothing. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Harrison." I had given him a false name, Sarah Harrison, Senior Portfolio Manager at GH Venture. The lie felt necessary. This man probably knew my father. They might have shared cigars at the same clubs, played golf at the same country estates. One careless revelation could unravel everything I had built. We talked for 2 hours. Jonathan asked probing questions about our investment philosophy, our risk management protocols, and our long-term vision. I answered carefully, revealing enough to demonstrate competence while protecting the core algorithms that gave us our edge. He seemed impressed. More importantly, he seemed genuinely curious, not just about the fund, but about the mind behind it. "Your strategies are remarkable," he said finally. "I have been in this business for 40 years, and I have never seen anything quite like what you have accomplished. Whoever designed these models is operating on a different level entirely. The founder prefers anonymity. So I understand." He paused, studying me with an expression I could not quite read. "May I ask why?" "Privacy is valuable, especially in an industry that rewards visibility over substance." Jonathan nodded slowly. "A wise perspective. Too many young managers today are more interested in magazine covers than market returns." He paused. "I would like to propose a partnership. Reed Capital would provide institutional distribution and operational support. In exchange, we would take a modest percentage of management fees. The arrangement would allow GH Venture to scale significantly while maintaining the discretion your founder clearly values." The offer was extraordinary. With Reed Capital's backing, my fund could grow tenfold within a few years. We would have access to clients and markets that remained closed to smaller operations. The legitimacy alone was worth millions. But there was a risk. Greater visibility meant greater scrutiny. More partners meant more opportunities for my identity to leak. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered that Jonathan Reed and Charles Holloway surely knew each other. What if my father discovered the truth through some casual conversation at a charity gala or industry conference? I accepted the partnership anyway. The following 2 years vindicated that decision beyond my most optimistic projections. Reed Capital opened doors I had not known existed. Our client base expanded to include pension funds, university endowments, and several prominent family offices. Assets under management climbed past $2 billion. Financial publications began writing about GH Venture as one of the most successful new funds of the decade, though they could only speculate about its mysterious leadership. On the morning of my 31st birthday, I received a valuation report from our accountants. The numbers blurred as I read them, too large to fully comprehend. After management fees and carried interest, my personal stake in the fund was worth slightly over $1 billion. I was a billionaire. The daughter Charles Holloway had called worthless now controlled more wealth than his entire company. For a long moment, I sat alone in my office staring at that figure. Outside my window, the city hummed with the energy of 8 million people chasing their own dreams and demons. None of them knew that a woman they had never heard of had just crossed a threshold that most could not imagine. I thought about calling my mother. I thought about reaching out to Daniel. I thought about walking into my father's office and laying that valuation report on his desk without saying a word. Instead, I did nothing. The moment was not right. The revenge I had been nursing for 7 years required more than proof of success. It required the perfect stage, the perfect audience, the perfect opportunity to expose the truth in a way that could never be denied or diminished. That opportunity would come. I could feel it approaching like a storm on the horizon. All I had to do was wait. The call from Jonathan Reed came on a gray November afternoon 3 weeks before Christmas. I was reviewing quarterly performance reports in my office when his name appeared on my phone. We spoke regularly about fund business, but something in the urgency of his voice told me this conversation would be different. "I need to discuss a potential opportunity," he began. "A rather delicate one." I set down my pen. "Go on." "Are you familiar with Holloway Securities?" The question hit me like a fist to the chest. For a moment, I could not breathe. 7 years of careful anonymity. 7 years of building walls between my past and present, and now my father's company name was coming through Jonathan Reed's lips as casually as a weather report. "I know of them," I managed. "Mid-sized brokerage firm, traditional client base, conservative strategies." "That is the public perception, yes." Jonathan paused. "The reality is somewhat more complicated. Charles Holloway has been pursuing an aggressive expansion strategy over the past 18 months. New offices in London and Singapore, a major push into algorithmic trading, significant investments in technology infrastructure. Sounds ambitious. Ambitious and poorly executed. His technology initiatives have been a disaster. The algorithms his team developed are years behind the competition. Meanwhile, the expansion costs have strained his capital reserves to the breaking point." Another pause. "He approached me last week about a potential partnership with Reed Capital." I stood and walked to the window, needing to move, needing to process what I was hearing. Below me, pedestrians hurried through the November cold, their breath forming small clouds that dissolved into the gray air. None of them knew that the world was suddenly tilting on its axis. What kind of partnership? He needs liquidity. Badly. The Singapore office is hemorrhaging money, and his traditional clients are beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about the firm's stability. Jonathan's tone shifted, becoming more careful. "Charles Holloway is a proud man. Approaching us for help was clearly difficult for him. But he is also a realist. Without a significant capital infusion, Holloway Securities could be in serious trouble within 6 months." The irony was almost too perfect to bear. My father, the man who had built his identity on financial success and market mastery, was now desperate for the kind of help that only firms like Reed Capital could provide. And Reed Capital's most valuable asset, the engine driving their extraordinary returns, was the fund created by the daughter he had thrown away like garbage. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because any partnership with Holloway Securities would involve due diligence on their technology capabilities, and any serious evaluation of their technology would require input from GH Ventures leadership." He hesitated. "I also thought you should know that Charles specifically requested our algorithmic trading expertise. He has heard rumors about a fund generating remarkable returns through proprietary models. He wants access to that technology." My father wanted my algorithms. He wanted the very thing he had dismissed as foolish dreams when I was 24 years old. The predictive models he had mocked were now the lifeline he needed to save his sinking company. "What did you tell him?" "That we would consider his proposal and respond after the holidays. I wanted to consult with you first." Jonathan cleared his throat. "Sarah, I should mention that during our conversation, Charles made several comments about the importance of family legacy and building something for future generations. He spoke about his son Daniel and the responsibility of passing the firm to the next generation." "Did he mention a daughter?" The question escaped before I could stop it. A dangerous slip revealing more than I intended. Jonathan was silent for a long moment. "No, he did not." Of course he hadn't. Grace Holloway had been erased from the family narrative years ago. To Charles, I simply did not exist. It was a mistake he had corrected, a failure he had excised a daughter who had vanished so completely that he could discuss legacy and inheritance without acknowledging that he had 2 children, not 1. The anger I felt was cold and sharp like a blade that had been sharpened over 7 years of waiting. "I will need to think about this," I said finally. "The situation requires careful consideration." "Of course, take whatever time you need." Jonathan paused again. "There is one more thing. Charles mentioned that he is hosting a Christmas dinner at the Skyline Sovereign Club next month. He has invited several potential partners, including representatives from Reed Capital. He is quite eager to make a favorable impression." Christmas dinner, the one event I had been excluded from my entire childhood, the annual celebration of Holloway's success, where powerful men gathered to congratulate themselves, while I sat alone in my room listening to laughter I was never allowed to join. "Who specifically did he invite?" I asked. "He invited me personally. I was planning to send one of my associates to my place, but I could attend myself if you think it advisable." Jonathan's voice carried a note of curiosity. You seem particularly interested in this situation. Holloway Securities represents a significant potential investment. It would be irresponsible not to conduct thorough research. The excuse sounded thin even to my own ears, but Jonathan did not press further. We agreed to speak again after Thanksgiving, and I ended the call with my hands trembling slightly. For the rest of that day, I could not concentrate on anything else. Every document I tried to read blurred into meaningless shapes. Every email I attempted to write trailed off into half-finished thoughts. My mind kept returning to the same impossible reality: my father's company was failing, and he had unknowingly come begging to the daughter he had disowned. The universe has a strange sense of justice. All those years of being told I would never succeed, never amount to anything, never understand the real world of business and finance. And now the man who had spoken those words was desperately seeking the expertise I had developed in secret. I could destroy him. The thought crystallized with terrifying clarity. I could refuse the partnership and watch Holloway Securities collapse under its own mismanagement. I could leak information about the firm's instability and accelerate its decline. I could use my influence with Reed Capital to ensure that no one else offered Charles the help he needed. But destruction was not what I wanted. Not really. What I wanted was something far more satisfying than watching my father fail from a distance. I wanted him to know. I wanted to see his face when he realized that the worthless daughter he had cast aside had become more successful than he could ever imagine. I wanted him to understand in front of everyone who mattered to him that his judgment had been wrong. The Christmas dinner would be perfect. A room full of his colleagues and partners gathered to celebrate his supposed triumph. The ideal stage for revealing a truth he could not deny or escape. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. My brother answered on the third ring. "Grace." Daniel's voice was thick with surprise. "Is that really you?" "We need to talk," I said. "In person. Can you meet me this weekend?" The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "Yes," he finally answered. "Tell me where." Daniel looked older than I remembered. We met at a quiet cafe in Boston, far enough from New York and Connecticut that we were unlikely to encounter anyone from our father's circle. He was already seated when I arrived, hunched over a cup of coffee that had gone cold, his face carrying the weight of years I had not witnessed. The brother I remembered had been golden. Confidence, the heir apparent who moved through the world with the easy assurance of someone who had never been told he was worthless. But the man sitting across from me now seemed diminished somehow, as if the burden of being Charles Holloway's chosen son had slowly crushed something vital inside him. "You look good," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. "Different. Stronger. 7 years will do that." He nodded, accepting the implicit accusation without protest. "I tried to stay in touch after you left, but Dad made it clear that any contact with you would be seen as disloyalty." His fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup. "I should have fought harder. I know that. I was a coward." The apology hung between us, fragile and insufficient. Part of me wanted to rage at him to catalog every unanswered message and every birthday that passed without acknowledgement. But another part, the part that remembered the brother who used to sneak me desserts from Christmas parties, recognized genuine regret in his eyes. "Tell me about Mom," I said instead. Daniel exhaled slowly. "She asks about you. Not when Dad is around, of course, but sometimes late at night she will come to my house and just talk about you, where you might be, what you might be doing." He paused. "She kept things you know. Report cards, photographs the program from your college graduation. She has a box hidden in her closet that Dad does not know about." The image of my mother secretly preserving traces of my existence while living under my father's roof was almost too painful to contemplate. Eleanor Holloway had always loved me in her limited, cautious way, but her love had never been strong enough to challenge the man who controlled every aspect of her life. Did she ever try to reach out? Once, about 4 years ago. She hired a private investigator to find your address. Daniel met my eyes. "She was going to write you a letter, apologize for everything, but then she got scared. Scared that Dad would find out, scared that you would reject her, scared of disrupting whatever peace you had managed to build. So she did nothing. She did one thing. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope yellowed with age and slightly crumpled. She gave this to me 2 years ago, asked me to keep it safe until the right moment. I took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a cashier's check, dated 7 years earlier, made out to me for $50,000. The memo line read, "For your future." She withdrew this from her personal account the week after Dad threw you out, Daniel explained. She was going to give it to you, but she could not figure out how without him finding out. Eventually, she just held on to it, hoping that someday she would have the chance. $50,000, a fortune to the broke, desperate woman I had been when I fled to New York. It could have changed everything, given me breathing room, allowed me to pursue opportunities without the constant pressure of survival. Instead, I scrubbed toilets and poured coffee while my mother hoarded this check in a hidden box, too afraid to act. I was not sure whether to feel grateful or furious. "Why are you showing me this now?" Daniel's expression darkened. "Because things have changed. Dad is not the invincible titan he pretends to be anymore. The company is struggling. The expansion was a disaster, and he is taking it out on everyone around him." He swallowed hard. "My marriage is falling apart, Grace. Meredith cannot stand being around him anymore, and I am so tangled up in trying to save the firm that I barely see my own children. Last month she told me she was considering divorce. I am sorry. Do not be. I made my choices." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "But here is what I need you to understand. Dad invited me to a meeting last week where he laid out his plan to save the company. He is counting on a partnership with Reed Capital to provide the capital and technology he needs. Without it, Holloway Securities could collapse within a year." I kept my expression neutral, though my heart was pounding. "And what does that have to do with me?" "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." Daniel studied my face with an intensity that reminded me uncomfortably of our father. 7 years ago, you were passionate about algorithms and predictive modeling. You had ideas that were years ahead of their time. And now, out of nowhere, a mysterious fund called GH Venture appears and starts generating returns that nobody can explain using strategies that sound remarkably similar to what you used to talk about. The cafe suddenly felt too warm. I resisted the urge to look away. "That is quite a theory." "GH," he continued. "Grace Holloway. It is not exactly subtle." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside the window, pedestrians hurried past, bundled against the November cold. A mother pushed a stroller. An elderly couple walked hand in hand. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by the weight of family betrayal and secret empires. "If I were involved with that fund," I said carefully, "what would you do with that information?" Daniel shook his head. "Nothing. I did not come here to threaten you or extract some kind of leverage. I came because—" his voice cracked. "Because I miss my sister. Because I have spent 7 years watching our father destroy everything he touches, including his own family. Because if you have found a way to succeed, despite everything he did to you, then I want to help however I can." "Help with what?" "Whatever you are planning." He held my gaze. "I know you, Grace. You did not reach out after all this time just to catch up over coffee. Something is happening. Something connected to Dad's situation and that Christmas dinner he keeps bragging about." I considered lying, considered maintaining the careful fiction that had protected me for so long. But looking at my brother's exhausted, desperate face, I realized that I did not want to do this alone anymore. The revenge I had been planning required an ally inside my father's world. Someone who knew his weaknesses, his schedule, his carefully constructed facade. Someone who had suffered under his control, just as I had. "There is a dinner at the Skyline Sovereign Club on Christmas Eve," I said quietly. "Dad has invited Jonathan Reed and other potential partners. He is planning to announce the Reed Capital deal as a triumph proof that he is still the master of Wall Street." "I know. I will be there." "So will I." I let the words settle between us. And before the night is over, everyone in that room is going to learn exactly who built the fund that is keeping Holloway Securities alive. Daniel's eyes widened. You are going to reveal yourself. I am going to show our father what his worthless daughter accomplished while he was busy pretending I did not exist. I folded the envelope containing my mother's check and slipped it into my purse. The question is whether you are willing to stand with me when I do. My brother was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. Just tell me what you need. The envelope arrived at my office on the first Monday of December, delivered by a courier in a black uniform who required my signature before releasing it. Heavy cream paper, embossed return address, the Holloway family crest stamped in gold on the back flap. I recognized my father's stationery immediately, the same pretentious stock he had used for decades, imported from some exclusive printer in London who served only old money families and European aristocracy. I carried the envelope to my desk and stared at it for several minutes before opening it. 7 years of silence, and now a formal communication delivered with the ceremony of a royal summons. My father had always understood the power of presentation. Inside was a single card, handwritten in the elegant script my mother had perfected during her years as a corporate wife. Dear Grace, your father and I would be honored by your presence at our annual Christmas dinner on December 24th. The event will be held at the Skyline Sovereign Club beginning at 7 o'clock in the evening. We hope this invitation finds you well and that we might have the opportunity to reconnect as a family during this holiday season. With warmth, Eleanor Holloway. The words were polite, careful, revealing nothing of the complicated history they attempted to bridge. My mother's handwriting, my father's stationery. A joint invitation that probably represented weeks of negotiation between two people who had spent their marriage avoiding difficult conversations. I knew, of course, why the invitation had really been sent. Daniel had warned me during our meeting in Boston. Our father was planning to use the Christmas dinner as a showcase for his supposed revival, the partnership with Reed Capital, the new technology initiatives, the triumphant return of Holloway Securities to the top tier of Wall Street firms. Having his entire family present would reinforce the image of stability and tradition he wanted to project. Even his disgraced daughter could be useful as a prop. What Charles did not know was that Jonathan Reed had already informed me about every detail of the planned announcement. The partnership terms, the timeline, the specific language my father intended to use when describing the algorithmic trading capabilities that would supposedly transform his company. Jonathan remained unaware of my true identity, but he had shared everything with the senior representative of GH Venture as a matter of professional courtesy. My father was building his celebration on a foundation he did not understand. The technology he planned to boast about was years behind what my fund had already developed. The partnership he considered his salvation was entirely dependent on my continued cooperation. One word from me and the entire arrangement would collapse. I picked up my phone and called the number on the invitation. My mother answered on the second ring. Holloway Residence. Hello, Mom. The silence that followed lasted nearly 10 seconds. I could hear her breathing, could imagine her standing in that enormous kitchen with its granite countertops and professional-grade appliances, trying to process the sound of a voice she had not heard in 7 years. Grace. My name emerged as barely a whisper. You received the invitation. I did. Will you... She stopped, started again. We would very much like you to come. Your father and I both feel that enough time has passed, that perhaps we can begin again. The careful phrasing told me everything. My father had likely demanded that she make this call, coaching her on exactly what to say. Charles Holloway never did anything without strategic purpose. If he wanted me at that dinner, it was because my presence served some agenda I had not yet fully understood. I will be there, I said. Oh, Grace. Her voice broke slightly. I am so pleased. I was very pleased. I have thought about you every day. Wondered where you were, what you were doing. I should have reached out sooner, I know. I should have been braver. We can talk about that when I see you. Yes, of course. She was crying now, softly, trying to hide it. Is there anything special you need? Dietary requirements. We can arrange a car to bring you if transportation is difficult. Transportation. She thought I might not be able to afford a cab to Manhattan. After 7 years, they still assumed I was scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck, drowning in the failure my father had predicted. That will not be necessary. I can manage on my own. We spoke for a few more minutes, exchanging hollow pleasantries that danced around everything that actually mattered. My mother asked vague questions about my life. I gave vague answers that revealed nothing. By the time we hung up, I felt exhausted, as if the conversation had drained something vital from my reserves. The following weeks blurred into preparation. Daniel and I met twice more, coordinating our approach to the dinner. He provided details about the guest list, the seating arrangements, the specific moments when my father planned to make his announcements. In return, I shared enough about my situation to ensure he understood the magnitude of what I had accomplished. His reaction, a mixture of shock, admiration, and something approaching awe, confirmed what I had suspected. My brother had genuinely believed I was struggling all these years. Jonathan Reed and I spoke several times about the Holloway partnership. He remained enthusiastic about the opportunity, though he deferred to my judgment on the technical aspects. During one conversation, he mentioned that financial journalists had been making inquiries about GH Venture. The fund's remarkable performance had attracted attention that our careful anonymity could not entirely deflect. There is growing speculation about the founder's identity, he said. Someone leaked information suggesting that GH, the venture, is led by a woman. The financial press is quite excited about the possibility of a female billionaire operating in complete obscurity. Let them speculate. For now, yes, but eventually the truth will emerge. These things always do. He paused. Have you given any thought to how you want to handle the inevitable revelation? I had given it considerable thought. Every night, lying awake in my Brooklyn apartment, I rehearsed the moment when everything would change. The words I would speak, the expression on my father's face, the reactions of everyone who had dismissed me, ignored me, written me off as Charles Holloway's disappointing daughter. When the time comes, I told Jonathan, I want to control the narrative, on my terms, in my timing. A wise approach, though I should mention that Charles Holloway has specifically requested that representatives from GH Venture attended his Christmas dinner. He wants to meet the people behind the fund that will supposedly transform his technology capabilities. My father wanted to meet me. He had no idea, of course. To him, GH Venture was just another asset to acquire, another tool to enhance his reputation. The thought of his worthless daughter being connected to such success had never crossed his mind. Tell him that the founder prefers to remain anonymous, but that a senior representative will attend. And who should I say will be representing the fund? I smiled, though Jonathan could not see it. Sarah Harrison. She has been involved with GH Venture since its inception. I believe she will make quite an impression. After ending the call, I spent the rest of the afternoon selecting what I would wear to my father's Christmas dinner. Nothing too expensive, nothing too flashy. I wanted to arrive looking exactly as they expected the struggling daughter who had never quite measured up. The transformation would come later. 19 days until Christmas Eve. 19 days until 7 years of patience and planning would finally bear fruit. My father thought he was staging a celebration of his own triumph. He had no idea that he was actually preparing the stage for mine. I could wait a little longer. After everything I had endured, 19 days was nothing. The Skyline Sovereign Club occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower overlooking Central Park, its windows glittering like diamonds against the December night. I arrived precisely at 7:15, late enough to ensure that most guests had already assembled, but early enough to avoid drawing attention to my entrance. The elevator carried me upward in silence, my reflection staring back from polished brass doors. Simple black dress, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in the same understated style I had worn my entire life. Nothing about my appearance suggested wealth or success or power. That was exactly the point. The doors opened onto a foyer decorated with enough Christmas greenery to fill a small forest. Wreaths of fresh pine hung from every available surface. A towering tree dominated one corner, its branches heavy with ornaments that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Somewhere deeper in the club, a jazz quartet played holiday standards, while servers in crisp white jackets circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. My father had spared no expense. This dinner was meant to announce his return to glory, and every detail had been calibrated to project confidence, stability, and enduring success. I spotted him immediately. Charles Holloway stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows holding court among a group of men in expensive suits. His voice carried across the room, punctuated by the appreciative laughter of people who understood that pleasing him was good for business. He looked every inch the Wall Street titan. Silver hair, perfectly styled posture, commanding, practiced with a smile on his lips. My mother hovered nearby, elegant in burgundy silk, her role, as always, to support and adorn without overshadowing. Daniel stood slightly apart from the main group, his wife Meredith beside him, wearing an expression of barely concealed unhappiness. The tension between them was visible even from across the room. I took a breath and stepped forward. My father noticed me first. His eyes swept over my appearance with the practiced assessment of a man who evaluated everything and everyone by the same cold metrics. Whatever he saw apparently confirmed his expectations because a small, practiced smile curled at the corner of his mouth. Grace. He did not move to embrace me, did not even step away from his circle of admirers, simply acknowledged my existence with a slight nod, like a king granting audience to a minor petitioner. "You made it. Thank you for inviting me. Your mother insisted." He turned back to his companions. "Gentlemen, my daughter Grace. She has been living in the city pursuing various interests." Various interests. The dismissal was so casual, so complete. 7 years of my life reduced to 2 vague words that meant nothing. One of the men extended his hand. "Lovely to meet you. What line of work are you in?" Before I could answer, my father intervened. "Grace has explored several paths over the years. She studied computers in school, I believe. Never quite found her footing in the business world." The condescension dripped from every syllable. His colleagues nodded sympathetically, their expressions a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment. "Poor Charles," their faces seemed to say. "Such a successful man, burdened with such a disappointing child." I let the insult pass without response. The night was young. Dinner was served in the main dining room, a cavernous space with a ceiling painted to resemble a winter sky. I had been seated at the far end of the table, as far from my father as geometrically possible, sandwiched between 2 junior partners from firms I did not recognize. The message was clear. I was present, but peripheral included, but unimportant. My father dominated the conversation throughout the meal. He spoke at length about his vision for Holloway Securities, his brilliant strategic pivots, and his upcoming partnership with Reed Capital that would revolutionize the firm's technology capabilities. His guests listened with appropriate admiration, interrupting only to offer compliments or ask questions designed to highlight his expertise. Not once did he mention that his expansion had nearly bankrupted the company. Not once did he acknowledge the months of desperate scrambling, the clients who had fled the board members who had questioned his judgment. In his telling, every setback was merely a setup for greater triumph. Between courses, my mother appeared at my side. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I am so glad you came," she whispered, squeezing my hand beneath the table. "I know this is difficult, but it means everything to me that you are here." "Does it mean everything to him, too?" She flinched at the question. "Your father has his ways. You know that. But underneath, he does care. He just does not know how to show it." 24 years of exclusion. 7 years of silence. A lifetime of being told I was worthless. And still, my mother made excuses. Still, she chose loyalty to him over honesty with me. I squeezed her hand back and said nothing. Dessert arrived with a flourish, individual chocolate soufflés topped with gold leaf, because of course they were. My father rose from his chair, crystal glass in hand, and the room fell silent with practiced obedience. I want to thank everyone for joining us on this special evening, he began. Christmas has always been important to the Holloway family, a time to gather with those who matter most, to reflect on our achievements, and to look forward to even greater success in the year ahead. He paused for effect, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled guests. As many of you know, Holloway Securities has undergone significant transformation recently. We have invested heavily in new markets, new technologies, new capabilities that position us for the future of finance. His smile widened. Tonight, I am pleased to announce that we are finalizing a partnership with Reed Capital that will bring world-class algorithmic trading to our platform. The future has never looked brighter. Applause rippled through the room. My father accepted it with the gracious confidence of someone who believed he deserved every bit of praise he received. Then his attention turned toward me. Of course, not everyone at this table has embraced the same path to success. His tone shifted, becoming lighter, almost playful. The voice of a man about to deliver a punchline. My daughter Grace, for instance, chose to pursue her own direction years ago. Computers and algorithms and various other experiments. Laughter from the guests, knowing indulgent laughter. I remember telling her once that machines could never replace human judgment, that real success required relationships, instinct, the ability to close a deal. He shook his head in mock bewilderment. She disagreed rather strongly, as I recall. Thought she knew better than her old father. More laughter. My face burned, but I kept my expression neutral. So tell me, Grace. He raised his glass in my direction, a gesture that looked like a toast, but felt like an attack. After all these years of proving yourself in the real world, do you finally understand what I was trying to teach you? Have you learned that dreams alone do not pay the bills? Every eye in the room turned toward me. I could feel their judgment, their amusement, their satisfaction at witnessing Charles Holloway humble his wayward daughter in front of witnesses. Daniel caught my gaze from across the table. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched around his napkin. He started to rise, started to speak in my defense. I gave him a slight shake of my head. Not yet. I have learned many things, I said quietly, holding my father's stare. Perhaps more than you realize. He laughed and returned to his seat, dismissing my response as meaningless. The guests resumed their conversations. Servers cleared the dessert plates. Another round of champagne was poured. Nobody noticed Jonathan Reed enter the dining room. Nobody except me. Jonathan Reed moved through the room with the quiet authority of a man who understood his own importance. He greeted several guests as he passed, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with the ease of someone who had spent decades navigating these circles. My father spotted him almost immediately, his face brightening with the particular enthusiasm he reserved for people who could advance his interests. Jonathan. Charles crossed the room to meet him, hand extended. I was beginning to worry you would not make it. My apologies for the late arrival. Business matters required attention. Jonathan's gaze swept across the gathering before settling briefly on me. The flicker of recognition was imperceptible to anyone who was not watching for it. I trust the evening has been productive. Very much so. I was just telling our guests about the partnership. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. Excellent, though I should mention that there has been a development regarding our arrangement. Jonathan accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. Something that requires discussion before we proceed further. My father's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. Perhaps we can speak privately after dinner. Actually, I think this particular matter should be addressed now, in front of your guests. Jonathan turned toward the room, raising his voice slightly. If I might have everyone's attention for a moment? Conversations died. Heads turned. The jazz quartet, sensing the shift in atmosphere, allowed their current piece to fade into silence. My father stood frozen beside Jonathan, his expression caught somewhere between confusion and the first stirrings of alarm. This was not part of his carefully orchestrated evening. Something was happening outside his control, and Charles Holloway did not tolerate surprises. Many of you know that Reed Capital has been exploring a partnership with Holloway Securities, Jonathan began. What you may not know is that the core technology driving this potential arrangement comes from a fund called GH Venture. Over the past several years, this fund has generated returns that rank among the most impressive in the industry. Their algorithmic trading strategies are quite frankly revolutionary." Murmurs rippled through the guests. My father nodded along, clearly uncertain where this was heading, but unwilling to interrupt a speech that seemed to be praising the deal he had worked so hard to secure. "The founder of GH Venture has operated in complete anonymity since the fund's inception," Jonathan continued. "Very few people know their identity. I myself only learned the truth recently, and I must confess, the revelation was quite surprising." He paused, and I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on my chest. 7 years of preparation, 7 years of patience. Everything had led to this single instant. The financial press has speculated endlessly about who built this remarkable fund. Some assumed it was a consortium of European investors. Others theorized about a reclusive tech billionaire or a team of former Wall Street quants. Jonathan smiled. "The reality is far more interesting." My father shifted his weight, growing visibly impatient. "Jonathan, while this is all fascinating, perhaps we could discuss the details privately." "Charles, I think you should hear this." Jonathan's tone carried a new edge. "In fact, I think everyone should hear this." He turned toward my end of the table, and suddenly every eye in the room followed his gaze. "The founder of GH Venture is present tonight. She has been here all along, seated quietly among you, listening to conversations about technology and innovation and the future of finance." Jonathan extended his hand in my direction. "Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce the billionaire founder of GH Venture, Grace Holloway." Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. I rose from my chair, my movements deliberate and unhurried. The faces around me displayed varying degrees of shocked disbelief and dawning comprehension. But I was not looking at them. I was looking at my father. Charles Holloway had turned the color of old paper. His mouth opened, slightly closed, opened again. For the first time in my memory, the man who always had an answer, always had a strategy, always had control, appeared completely lost. "That is impossible," he finally managed. "Grace does not, she could never, build a billion-dollar investment fund using the algorithms and strategies you dismissed as foolish dreams." I walked slowly toward him, letting each step carry the weight of every insult, every exclusion, every moment of humiliation I had endured. "You are correct that it should have been impossible. A 24-year-old woman with no connections, no capital, no family support. By every measure you believe in, I should have failed." I stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see the vein pulsing in his temple. "Instead, I built something from nothing. While you were expanding into markets, you did not understand losing money on technology you could not master. I was developing algorithms that outperformed everything your company has ever created." My voice remained steady, calm, almost conversational. "The partnership you announced tonight, the revolutionary technology that was supposed to save Holloway Securities, it comes from my fund, from my work, from the daughter you told would never amount to anything." The room remained frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the servers had stopped circulating, trapped in the gravity of the moment. My mother sat at the table with tears streaming silently down her face. Daniel had risen from his seat, standing apart from the crowd, his expression caught between grief and something that looked almost like relief. Meredith pressed her hand against her chest mouth, hanging open in undisguised shock. My father's composure began to crack. I watched it happen in real time, the trembling of his hands, the rapid blinking, the desperate search for words that might salvage his dignity. "You are lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is some kind of trick, some scheme to embarrass me." "Jonathan." I did not look away from my father. "Would you care to confirm the details?" "Grace Holloway is indeed the founder and majority owner of GH Venture," Jonathan said. "I have reviewed the documentation personally. There is no question about her identity or her accomplishments." "But she was—" My father grasped for the narrative he had constructed, the story he had told himself and everyone else for 7 years. She was working as a waitress, living in some apartment in Queens. She had nothing. I had everything that mattered. I felt the truth of those words resonating in my bones. Intelligence, determination, the absolute certainty that I would prove you wrong. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Perhaps he was. For my entire life, Charles Holloway had looked at his daughter and seen only disappointment, only failure, only a problem to be solved or ignored. Now, finally, he was forced to see what I had become. The technology your company needs to survive exists because you threw me away. I let each word land with precision. The algorithms you mocked are now worth more than your entire firm. The daughter you erased from your legacy is the only reason Holloway Securities might have a future. I stepped back, creating distance between us. But here is what you need to understand, Father. This partnership, the one you plan to announce as your triumph, it only exists because I have not yet decided to end it. I held his gaze. Your company's survival is in my hands now. The worthless daughter holds all the power. My father said nothing. For the first time in his life, Charles Holloway had no response. Around us, the Christmas decorations glittered with hollow cheer. The jazz quartet remained silent. The guests stood witness to something none of them had expected, a reckoning 7 years in the making. The room waited to see what would happen next. So did I. My father recovered faster than I expected. The initial shock drained from his face, replaced by something harder and more familiar. Charles Holloway had not built an empire by surrendering to surprise. Within moments, he was recalibrating, searching for an angle that would let him regain control of the narrative. Well, he straightened his jacket with deliberate precision. It seems my daughter has inherited more of my instincts than I realized. A few nervous laughs scattered through the crowd. My father seized the opening, his voice growing stronger. I always knew Grace had potential. Perhaps my methods were unconventional, but clearly the tough love approach produced results. He spread his hands in a gesture of magnanimous acceptance. What father would not be proud to see his child achieve such success? The audacity of it stole my breath. He was trying to claim credit. After everything, the years of dismissal, the cruel words, the absolute certainty that I would fail, he was attempting to rewrite history in front of witnesses who had heard him mock me less than an hour ago. Tough love. I repeated the phrase slowly, letting its absurdity fill the silence. Is that what you call telling your daughter she would never amount to anything? Is that what you call excluding her from every family gathering for her entire childhood? Is that what you call throwing her out of the house with nothing because she refused to become your employee? The warmth drained from his expression. Grace, this is neither the time nor place. You chose the time and place. I cut him off without raising my voice. You invited these people to celebrate your supposed triumph. You used this dinner to humiliate me in front of your colleagues. You asked me in front of everyone whether I had finally learned that dreams do not pay bills. I turned to address the room. Let me tell you what tough love actually looked like in the Holloway household. My brother received a car for his 16th birthday. Mine was forgotten entirely. Daniel spent summers learning the family business while I was told to stay in my room during Christmas parties because my presence was inconvenient. When I graduated with honors from Stanford, my father did not attend. When I showed him the algorithms that would eventually make me a billionaire, he dismissed them as foolish dreams that would never succeed. My mother made a soft sound of distress. I pressed forward anyway. 7 years ago, I stood in his study and refused to become a subordinate in his company. I wanted to build something of my own, using skills he considered worthless. For that crime, he told me I was no longer his daughter and ordered me to leave. That is not... My father started. I spent months sleeping on couches, working as a waitress, cleaning hotel rooms to survive. I did not give him space to interrupt. While you were telling people I had failed, I was building a fund that would eventually control more capital than your entire company. While you were running Holloway Securities into the ground with strategies you did not understand, I was developing the technology you now desperately need. The silence that followed was absolute. Guests who had laughed at my father's jokes minutes earlier now studied their shoes or stared at the ceiling. Nobody wanted to meet his eyes. Daniel stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. She is telling the truth, all of it. My father's head snapped toward his son. "Daniel, no, Dad, I am done pretending." Daniel's voice cracked with years of suppressed frustration. "I watched you treat Grace like she was worthless her entire life. I watched Mom hide birthday cards and report cards because she was afraid of your reaction. I watched you erase your own daughter from family photographs. You have no idea what you are talking about." "I have every idea." Daniel moved to stand beside me. "You used me as a weapon against her. You made me choose between being your heir and being her brother, and I chose wrong for far too long." My mother rose from her seat, tears streaming openly now. She did not go to my father. She came to us, to Daniel and me, and took my hand in both of hers. "I am so sorry," she whispered, "for everything I should have done and did not, for every time I let fear keep me silent." We stood together, the three of us, facing the man who had controlled our lives for so long. Behind him, his carefully curated audience of business partners and social connections watched the Holloway family fracture along lines that had been invisible to everyone but us. My father looked at his wife and son, standing with the daughter he had disowned. For a moment, I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not remorse exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding that his power had limits he had never acknowledged. "This is absurd." His voice had lost its commanding edge. "A misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Grace, whatever grievances you have, we can discuss them privately. There is no need to what? Tell the truth in front of people who matter to you." I shook my head. "You spent my entire life caring more about your reputation than your family. So let your reputation hear exactly what kind of man you are." I released my mother's hand and stepped toward him one final time. "Holloway Securities survives right now because GH Venture has not withdrawn from the partnership discussions. Your company's technology initiative depends entirely on algorithms I developed. The institutional investors keeping your firm afloat are the same investors who trust my fund." I paused, letting the implications settle. "I could destroy everything you have built with a single phone call." Fear flickered across his face, real fear perhaps for the first time in decades. "But I am not going to do that." The tension in the room shifted. My father's eyes narrowed, searching for the trap. "Destroying you would be easy. It would also make me exactly like you, someone who uses power to crush anyone who challenges them." I straightened my shoulders. "Instead, I am going to do something you never did for me. I am going to give you a chance." "What kind of chance?" "The partnership can proceed, but not on your terms. GH Venture will take a controlling interest in Holloway Securities' technology division. You will step back from operational decisions and allow people with actual expertise to guide the transition." I held his gaze. "Daniel will oversee the restructuring. He has spent years cleaning up your mistakes quietly. It is time he received recognition for that work." My father's jaw tightened. "You expect me to hand my company over to— I expect you to accept reality." My voice remained calm but unyielding. "Your choices are simple. Accept these terms and Holloway Securities survives. Refuse and I withdraw from the partnership entirely. Without our technology and without Reed Capital's backing, your firm will collapse within a year. Perhaps sooner." The room held its breath. My father stood motionless, trapped between his pride and his survival. For a man who had spent his entire life controlling everything around him, this moment must have felt like drowning. Every path forward required him to surrender something he valued. Finally, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders sagged. "It seems I have no choice." "You have exactly the choice you gave me 7 years ago." I stepped back, creating distance between us. "The difference is that I am offering you a future. That is more than you ever offered me." I turned and walked toward the exit, my mother and Daniel falling into step beside me. Behind us, the most powerful man I had ever known stood alone among his glittering decorations, and his stunned guests finally understanding what it meant to lose everything he thought mattered. The December air hit my face like a baptism as I stepped onto the sidewalk outside the Skyline Sovereign Club. Behind me, the tower glittered with holiday lights, its windows glowing warm against the cold Manhattan night. inside my father's carefully orchestrated celebration, had crumbled into something he would never recover from. His guests were probably already composing the messages they would send to colleagues and competitors, spreading the story of what they had witnessed. By morning, every significant player on Wall Street would know that Charles Holloway's worthless daughter had become a billionaire while he was not watching. I did not look back. My mother emerged through the doors a moment later, followed by Daniel. The three of us stood together on the pavement, breath forming small clouds that dissolved into the darkness. None of us spoke immediately. Some moments require silence to settle properly. Finally, my mother reached for my hand. "I should have protected you." Her voice was thick with tears she no longer tried to hide. All those years I told myself I was keeping the peace. Those things would get better if I just waited, if I just gave your father time to come around. She shook her head. I was a coward. I chose comfort over my own daughter. You were afraid. Fear is not an excuse, not when your child is suffering. She squeezed my fingers. I kept that check for 7 years, telling myself I would find the right moment to give it to you. But there was never a right moment because I was never brave enough to create one. I thought about the woman I had been at 24, desperate alone, scraping together enough money to survive another week. $50,000 would have changed everything back then. It would have given me breathing room options and the luxury of patience. Instead, I had built my empire from nothing. Every success had been earned through my own determination without the safety net my mother had been too frightened to provide. Maybe it was better this way, I said slowly. Maybe I needed to do it alone. That does not make what I did right. No, it does not. I turned to face her fully. But I am not interested in holding on to anger anymore. It served its purpose. It drove me to prove something that needed proving. Now I want to move forward. My mother broke into fresh tears and pulled me into an embrace. For a long moment I simply let her hold me, feeling the warmth of connection that had been absent for so many years. She smelled the same as I remembered from childhood, roses and vanilla, the perfume she had worn my entire life. Some things did not change even when everything else did. Daniel waited until we separated before speaking. What happens now with the company, I mean? That depends on you. I studied my brother's face in the amber glow of the streetlights. The offer I made in there was genuine. GH Venture will partner with Holloway Securities, but only if you take operational control. Dad's era is over. The question is whether you want to build something new or walk away entirely. He considered the question with more seriousness than I expected. The golden son, the heir apparent, actually weighed the possibility of abandoning the throne he had been groomed to inherit. Meredith wants me to leave, he admitted. She has been begging me for years to find something else, something that does not require constant proximity to Dad. The stress has nearly destroyed our marriage. What do you want? I want to make things right. He met my eyes. Not just with you, though that matters more than I can say. I want to build something I can actually be proud of, something that does not require stepping on people or pretending to be someone I am not. Then stay. Fix what Dad broke. Build the company Holloway Securities should have been all along. A smile crossed his face, tentative but genuine. Partners. Partners. We shook hands there on the sidewalk, sealing an agreement that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. The brother who had chosen safety over loyalty was finally ready to stand for something. The sister who had been cast out was finally ready to let someone in. A car pulled to the curb, the black sedan I had arranged earlier in the evening. My driver stepped out and opened the rear door, waiting patiently. I should go, I said. There will be a lot to sort out over the coming weeks. Lawyers, contracts, restructuring plans. Jonathan Reed will want to discuss the modified partnership terms. My mother touched my arm. Will we see you again soon, I mean? Not another 7 years. I am not disappearing this time. The words felt strange in my mouth, but also right. We have a lot of lost time to make up for. I am not saying it will be easy or that I am ready to forget everything that happened, but I am willing to try. She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Daniel put his arm around her shoulders, steadying her. I climbed into the car and watched them through the window as the driver pulled away from the curb. Two figures standing together in the cold, growing smaller as the distance between us increased. My family, broken and imperfect, and finally beginning to heal. The drive back to Brooklyn took nearly an hour through holiday traffic. I spent most of it staring out the window, watching the city lights blur past. Manhattan gave way to the Brooklyn Bridge, its cables strung with decorations that sparkled against the dark water below. Then the quieter streets of my neighborhood brownstones, decorated with wreaths and electric candles. My apartment was exactly as I had left it. Modest furniture, simple decorations. A space designed for function rather than impression. I hung my coat in the closet and poured myself a glass of wine, then stood at the window overlooking the street. 7 years ago, I had stood at a similar window in a cheap motel near LaGuardia, staring at a water-stained ceiling and wondering if I would survive the week. I had been 24 years old, broke alone, and absolutely certain of only one thing, that I would make my father regret what he had done. Now that moment has arrived. The revenge I had planned so carefully had unfolded exactly as I imagined, perhaps even better. My father had been exposed, humbled, forced to confront the consequences of his cruelty in front of everyone who mattered to him. Justice had been served. So why did I feel so quiet inside? I had expected triumph, elation, the fierce satisfaction of victory after a long campaign. Instead, I felt something gentler, completion perhaps, the sense of a chapter ending and a new one beginning. Revenge had driven me for 7 years. It had fueled my ambition, sharpened my focus, given me a reason to keep fighting when everything seemed impossible. But standing here now, watching snow begin to fall outside my window, I understood that revenge had also been a prison. As long as I defined myself by what my father had done to me, I remained trapped in his shadow. Tonight I had stepped out of that shadow forever. The wine was good, the snow was beautiful. Tomorrow would bring complications and challenges and the hard work of building something new. But tonight on Christmas Eve, I allowed myself to simply be present, to feel grateful for how far I had come and hopeful for where I might go. My phone buzzed with a message from Daniel, a photograph of him and Meredith and their children gathered around a Christmas tree with the caption, "Thank you for giving me my family back." I smiled and typed a response, "Merry Christmas, brother." Then I set down the phone, finished my wine, and watched the snow fall over Brooklyn until my eyes grew heavy with sleep. The story of Grace Holloway, the worthless daughter who became a billionaire, was just beginning. But the story of Grace Holloway seeking revenge against her father was finally blessedly over. If you found yourself in this story tonight, if you recognize the pain of being dismissed or the hunger to prove yourself, I hope you will carry something with you. Your worth is not determined by the people who failed to see it. Your future is not written by those who tried to hold you back. Build something beautiful from whatever broken pieces you have been given. And when the time comes to confront the people who doubted you, choose the kind of power that sets you free rather than the kind that keeps you chained to the past. That is the real victory. That is the only revenge that matters.